Hi, I'm Ian, and this is a technical introduction to field recording. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how to actually get out and get recording. So I've talked a lot about equipment and technology and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about how to actually get out and do some recording. But first I want to talk about the legal and ethical issues. I know, but it's important. If you're going to go tramping all over the countryside recording sound, you need to be a good citizen, and you certainly don't want to do any harm to the wildlife you're trying to record. So follow the countryside code. Don't litter, trespass, leave gates open, and so on. Get to know your local countryside code, as different locales may have different rules. Scotland, for example, has different laws and conventions for countryside access compared to England. But be particularly careful how you approach wildlife and follow your local laws, rules and codes of practice. For example, in some areas it might be illegal to go into the mating grounds of some species, and it's illegal for good reason. If you're going to go after wildlife, the best approach is to get in touch with local wildlife societies and legal authorities to make sure that whatever you do takes into account the needs of the animals. And of course, don't forget that wildlife, or even domesticated animals, can be dangerous. So let's talk about actually recording sound. The basic problem is that the way we perceive sound when we're here is based on a lot of different cues, not just the sound itself. So if you're hearing some amazing sound, like a huge waterfall say, and then you just place a microphone where your head is, the result will probably be disappointing. This is why the overwhelming majority of film sound is recorded separately. That process is called Foley, and there are plenty of resources about that online. So making a good, satisfying recording in the field is a real challenge. Perhaps the most important factor in sound recording is distance. Loudness follows an inverse square law, so as you get further from a source of sound, the sound gets quieter with the square of the distance. So if you're 3 times further away, the sound will be 1/9 as loud. So distance is crucial. If you're too far away, sound will just be too quiet. You can increase the gain up to a point, but that will just increase the loudness of incidental noises, like the movement of air and traffic rumble and so on. On the other hand, you can use distance to select sounds. If you get very close to a source of sound, other sounds will relatively be much quieter. So distance is our enemy and our friend, and understanding how to use it is crucial in field recording. Just how you get a satisfying recording is going to depend hugely on your subject and on what you're trying to do with it. There's no one right answer, you just have to figure it out by trial and error. But there are some guides you can follow. One is to simplify. Just like in photography, where you try to isolate your subject from the surrounding clutter, your recordings will generally be nicer to listen to if they're not cluttered. So try to focus in on one source of sound, or a small number of them. You can do this by using distance to select the sounds that you actually want. Of course, sometimes you want the wider perspective. That's completely up to you, and the main thing is to experiment and find out how different perspectives affect the finished result. You can't find the right way to capture something without listening to what's coming from your mics. while you're recording, monitoring lets you keep tabs on what's happening. If some unexpected thing comes up, and it often will, then you can adjust either right then or next time around so that you can capture it perfectly. So have a good pair of headphones and experiment with different mic placements and listen carefully to what difference they make. Your mics are very sensitive, and in field recording we will often be using high gain to capture distant, quiet sounds. So any sound at all from close to the mic will come through loud and clear. That's the inverse square law again. So you need to be really quiet while recording. Make sure that nothing touches the mic or the cables or mic supports. Ideally, you would leave the mics well alone while recording and monitor remotely by using long cables, for example, or at a pinch, just leave the recorder running unattended. If you need to handhold the mic, then you need to keep really still. Don't breathe if you can help it. Using a good suspension on a hand grip will help, but any significant handling noise will still come through. So use a light, firm grip, get comfortable holding the mic, then keep still. If you're after wildlife, then bear in mind that it needs time to recover from the noise you make hiking in. The best solution is to remove yourself from the scene and then wait 20 minutes or so. Long cables or a hide are useful here. And don't forget to bring a camp chair to sit on. Above all, practice as much as you can. Get out and record anything that's going on and experiment to see how you can get the best sound. Really listen to your recording and compare how it sounds with your subjective impression of the place. Listen to the sounds you make, like movement noise and handling noise, and learn how they affect the recording. Listen to how different wind strengths affect the recording and experiment with different mitigation techniques like different supports, suspensions, windshields and so on. And above all, experiment with placing the mic in different positions relative to the subject and really learn how that affects the sound. Once you've got your gear, it's time to go out and actually record something. Exactly how you organise this is, as usual, going to depend on you and your goals, but there are a few tips that might be worth sharing. So I'll tell you how I approach this. Of course, there's a lot to be said for just grabbing sound spontaneously, but if you have a particular thing in mind, then planning ahead could help a lot. With a simple, lightweight recording setup, this might be easy, but with a more complex setup, it might be worth spending some time thinking about how you're going to get it to where it needs to be. Start by figuring out where you need to be to get the sound you want. You want a place that has the right sound, but ideally away from traffic and people, unless you're planning on including them. Traffic noise can carry a surprisingly long way, easily miles depending on the terrain, and particularly at quiet times like dawn. Studying maps and satellite views can help a lot, and going and scouting out the location the day before can help too, especially if you're going to arrive in the dark. You'll need to plan where to park, legally and without creating a hazard, and how far you're going to have to carry your gear. And plan for plenty of time. Setting up can take quite a while. Check out the weather. Rain and strong winds are two things you might want to avoid, unless of course they're part of your plans, but cold weather and humidity can really affect condenser mics, so those are things you might want to think about as well. And of course the weather forecast should inform your personal preparations, whether you're bringing hot soup or sunscreen. And check out any other local conditions that might be relevant. For example, if you're going to be recording on the seashore, check out when the tides are. If you're going to be recording the dawn chorus, find out when dawn actually is. All that kind of information can be found online easily enough. Before you actually take off, it's worth doing some pre-trip preparation. So first of all, assemble and test the complete recording kit. Put the whole thing together, including tripods, clamps, windshields, thread adapters, and anything else that you'll need. I'd be embarrassed to tell you how many times I've gone out for a recording session only to find that I've forgotten some trivial but crucial thing. Of course, if your kit is just a handheld recorder, then this is all pretty simple. But still, it's worth checking it out just to make sure that the batteries are good and that you have the windshield, spare batteries, that kind of thing. Once your kit is set up, record some quiet sound, like the TV down low or maybe the fridge running. And listen for any annoying crackles or hisses. You might have a loose connection or a damp microphone. Check that all your batteries are good, obviously for the recorder and mics, but also for any other gear you're taking along, like your torch or headlamp, that kind of thing. Check that you've got spare memory cards, and now would be a good time to make sure that you've offloaded any old recordings that might be on there. And finally, don't forget to pack gear for yourself, like sandwiches, sunscreen, warm clothes, whatever you might need. Once you're actually on the site, it's time for more preparation. First, turn your cell phone off, or at least put it into airplane mode. The signal from a cell phone can burn right through into your recording. Set up your mics and windshield. Put them on a tripod if that's what you're using. You should probably connect your mics to your recorder first before turning the recorder on. Plugging or unplugging your mics with Phantom Power Live is probably not a good idea. Generally turn off your recorder, or at least turn off Phantom Power before plugging in or unplugging the mics. If your mics have low cut or attenuate switches, check them, and if in doubt, turn them off. With the recorder on, check the settings: the date and time, the sample rate, bit depth and file format, whether Phantom Power or plug-in power is on or off, and the limiters, low cut filters and auto gain. Auto gain should certainly be off. Get your mic set up for your subject and then set your gain. Set your level knob to about the middle of its range, and then go into the menus and adjust the gain until the meters are moving around the top of their range. Then use the level knob to fine-tune the levels. The idea is to record as loud as you can, but without ever reaching zero, because that will clip. You want a good strong signal, but clipping will create a horrible distortion that ruins your recording. A good rule of thumb is to get the meters peaking at about -12 dB, or less if your subject is unpredictable. But don't worry about the loudness of the final work while you're recording. Once you've got a good clean recording, you can set the loudness of the finished work in post. So you're all set. Record. Don't forget to actually press record. Just because you can hear the sound through your phones doesn't mean you're actually recording. Check the display for the record symbol. Once you're actually recording, make an audio note. You might do that at the end if you're concerned about frightening the wildlife, but it's well worth doing anyway. Speak into the mic and record any information which will help you make sense of the recording later. That should include at least the date, time and place, the mics and recorder in use, the microphone configuration and the exact placement of the mics relative to the subject. But you might also include information about the weather, wildlife behaviour and anything else that could come in useful. This is stream recording at Altban in Aviemore. The microphones are placed just away from the stream. The weather is cold but relatively calm and clear. There's very little if any wildlife around. The recording setup is mid-side with the NPH 8040 mid on channel 1 and the NPH 30 side on channel 2, positive left, both mics in a furb loop. The recorder is the R26. If you can, get away from the mics so that your breathing and other noises aren't picked up. You should monitor through the recording, but if you do take your headphones off near the mics, turn the volume down or unplug them to avoid feedback. Record for much longer than you think you need. Just exactly what that means will depend on your subject, but usually you want at least 5 minutes, maybe more. If there's some specific thing happening, get plenty of pre-action and post-action sound. And make allowances for any incidental noises that you'll cut. A plane going overhead might be annoying for a minute or two while you're recording, but when you get home and review the recording later, you might find that it's audible for 10 minutes or more. So if you're going to be cutting it out, make an allowance for that. When you're ready to press stop, listen carefully. Something interesting might have started happening and it would be a shame to cut it. One thing I find really useful is to take pictures of my recording setup, including the mics and how they're positioned relative to the subject. This really helps me to understand how I got a recording later on. Take a picture that includes the latitude and longitude or a grid reference off your phone, for example, so that you can find the exact place later on. This will also be helpful if you want to upload your recording to a sound map. Once you've packed up and gone back home, there's still more to do. It's really important to organise what you've recorded, at least a little bit, otherwise you can end up with a massive sound files on your computer and no idea what was recorded where. So a little organisation up front will help a lot later. It's best to get this done while it's still fresh in your mind. So first, transfer the files to your workstation and organise them into folders. Just exactly how you do this is going to depend a lot on what exactly you're doing. What I do is create a top-level folder for each kind of recording, like trains, birds, and so on, and then within that create a subfolder for each recording session. Then within the session folder I create a subfolder called Originals, and that's where I put the audio files from the recorder. I always try to remember to get pictures of my setup, and those go in another subfolder called Pictures. The point of the Originals subfolder is that those original audio files never get altered, but now would be a good time to rename them to something more useful. It's also a good idea to keep notes about exactly what you recorded and how. Now again, how you do this is really going to depend on your whole way of working. But what I do is create a readme.txt file in the session folder containing information like this. The date and time of the recording, the location being very specific so I can find it again, the microphone format like XY or mid-side or ORTF, the recorder and microphones used in the recording, a general description of what I was doing, any relevant information about the environment like the weather, stream states, wildlife behaviour, that kind of thing, any per track information like microphone placement, and any technical details, for example for mid-side, which microphone was on which channel and which way the figure 8 microphone was facing. Once you've done all this, make a backup. Either back up your whole computer or back up the specific recording session, or better yet, both. Once you've verified that you have a good backup of your audio, you can wipe the original memory card for reuse. There's really no point in using memory cards as long-term storage, and it just causes confusion if you leave your old files on there. So that's an overview of one approach to field recording. I've tried to give you some tips which I hope might be useful, but as I've said before, I'm really no expert on field recording, and the main thing is to get out and practice so that you can develop your own skills and techniques. Of course, it doesn't end there, as our recordings can be edited, archived and published, but those subjects are worth their own chapters.